Your group publishes a biannual survey of what economic and financial education looks like in the U.S. And the takeaway for me is kind of discouraging. Less than half of U.S. states require any kind of economic education in order to graduate from high school. This really doesn't sound great, but maybe you can, share some silver linings here with us?
Well, the silver lining is that there has been progress, Scarlett, and thank you for addressing this topic for us. It's lovely to be here with you. So over the last 2 surveys, 4 years, we've had 7 states pass requirements. So we're moving in the right direction, but unfortunately, the trajectory is pretty shallow. So that's the silver lining. The other thing is that the survey of the states provides a great opportunity to advocate for more and better requirements and access for all students, not just some, in every state across the country.
So Florida recently added a course in personal finance to graduate, but what would you say is a state that has done the most, that is doing the best on this front?
So there are a number of states that have passed requirements and are implementing it. I hate to have a favorite state, but because I have affiliates in every state, and they'll take exception to that. But the thing that makes the real difference is to have great professional development. So you pass the requirement, and that's great, but then what? Because teachers, like most Americans, also many of them struggle with their own personal finances. So really great states not only pass the requirement, but they make sure there's some oomph behind implementation. Resources for professional development and resources for the teachers so that they feel competent and competent to provide that information to their students in the classroom.
So I've spoken with female fund managers who are trying to narrow the gender gap in their industry. And there's obviously a pipeline problem. There's not enough women who are in the kinds of subjects that would lead to perhaps a job in that industry. Young women in particular aren't even aware that this is a profession that's open to them, managing money professionally. This is all a reflection of the absence of investment literacy. But this all starts early because it's tied to financial literacy. Talk us through the long-term implications of what a lack of an overall economic education means for young people, especially girls.
So our mission says it all. We give K-12 kids the tools and knowledge of personal finance and economics so they can make the best decisions for themselves, their families, and their communities. With those capabilities, we think children will be set up for shaping the life that they want to live. And also, if we're really serious in this country about financial stability and economic mobility, we have to start young. Right? And we're not talking about really detailed stuff when the kids are in elementary school or middle school or high school, but think about learning to swim. You have to have the basics. You have to feel safe putting your head underwater, dog paddle, so that you're not afraid of the water. And that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that every student has access to this education and has the basic language and grammar of personal finance so that they're not afraid, so that they feel confident in asking questions. Now, obviously, as a woman, teaching young girls these skills is near and dear to my heart. I was really fortunate that my dad, when I was a really little girl, would put pictures of Mickey Siebert in front of me and tell me all about her and that I could be just like her. I'm well aware that not every child and certainly not every little girl has that. We have an amazing program called Invest in Girls. And not only do we teach girls the fundamentals of personal finance, just as we teach all students, but we also have a career exploration part of that.
Okay.
So they get introduced to careers all across the spectrum, from investment to commercial banking, investment banking, controller. I mean, if you think about it, every little town, every small business, every not-for-profit has somebody that takes care of the money. So if we can teach girls these skills and then introduce them to the breadth of careers that they could have in finance, it is a path toward a job, a career.
On top of that, in every household, there's someone who controls the money as well.
There is.
I hope that financial literacy is not political like everything else in this country. I would hope that red states and blue states alike see the value and the benefits of young people understanding debt and inflation and the relationship between the two at a household level and at a national level. What is preventing more states, at least more than half of the states out there, from taking more action on this?
So education, as you know, is very local in this country, and it's funded largely at the local level. So we absolutely have to teach our children how to read and to do math. That's those are the most important things. And I apologize to the science and history people, but they have to have those basic skills. So what happens is things start getting crowded out, and there isn't funding to hire enough educators. Teachers are incredibly pressed these days. They teach a lot of different classes. They have very little prep time. So that makes it really challenging to get this into the schools.
So it's tied to a shortage of teachers overall.
Well, I'm not sure if it's tied to a shortage of teachers, but it's tied to a shortage of resources and teachers available to teach something that's not considered a core class. And I think also thoughtful people worry about, are the teachers feeling comfortable doing this? So again, we come back to the importance of professional development and resources for teachers.
Right, but I suppose that kind of underscores a problem. If teachers themselves don't feel comfortable teaching it, then it's more apparent than ever that this is a necessary skill set to pass on. There's also a misconception that financial education is basically math of a different form, maybe higher form, but at least different, and that maybe just expanding the math curriculum will take care of things. Is that thinking flawed?
We think that financial education can fit in a number of places. It can fit as a standalone class. It can be taught after school. It can be certainly taught in math, which is one of my favorite places to teach it. But remember, we're teaching about concepts and critical thinking skills around things like debt, risk, savings, investment, what it's like to earn income. So those concepts go beyond just the numbers, and people really have to understand those viscerally. By the way, those are the 6 standards topics that are in the national standards for personal finance, which we released this year along with Jumpstart. They're unified standards, one set now. They've been checked for cultural relevance to make sure that they're really accessible to all students everywhere.
Is there a linkage between the drive to include financial education in the curriculum and the state of the economy and the financial markets? Meaning, after a crisis, there's urgency to get this included in the schools. Yet, when the economy is stable and markets are robust, there's complacency.
Well, I think our mission is evergreen. You know better than anyone that over the last 10 years, we've had housing crisis, recession, unemployment, now inflation, the COVID crisis. So this mission is evergreen. I have to say I'm a little heartened when I look back over the last 4 or 5 years, and if we take the COVID situation out of that, the economy has been very strong, and yet we've seen progress. I think over time, people have understood that this really is an important tool, and I think it's more tied to the discussions that people are having about equity. Because to achieve economic mobility in this country, financial stability, you have to have these tools.
Yeah. Just one point of clarification. We talk about financial literacy, financial education, economic education as kind of this big whole, but your group makes a clear distinction between personal finance and economics. Is one more important than the other? If a school is as resource challenged as some are, which one should they be picking?
I've got to speak from where I sit on this one. I think they're both really important, and they are different. Personal finance is more personal. Think about it as that is the micro, but you have to understand, for example, if you're thinking about investing and saving, what the big picture is. And economics teaches you about trade-offs, choices. Those are fundamental economic concepts, and also how to understand how markets are moving, what's happening in the world. Look at all the things that are going on right now that are affecting our economy. So people have to be able to plan for that as they assess their risk, an economic concept applied to personal finance. So we think they're both. Economics isn't going to teach you how to budget, but personal finance isn't going to give you the view of the macroeconomy.
Yeah, I just think back, and perhaps the way that they taught it in high school doesn't always make it relevant to young people's lives. I mean, most of what you just said, I learned on the job here at Bloomberg, but not in high school economics, which I took, and I couldn't tell you anything beyond, there was a lot of supply and demand talk and a demand curve, which I never applied to anything.
Well, we try to make everything we do relevant. All of our resources are developed by educators. They are all based on real world things. They're active learning. So we actually are running some seminars during this April Financial Literacy Month that cover things like cryptocurrency, that cover other kinds of cybersecurity risks, because everybody has those these days. Climate change, right, is another issue that everybody is interested in, or many people and many students certainly are. So we've put up some lessons on how you use economics to think about those things. And we'll be having our National Economics Challenge over the next 2 or 3 months. And the critical thinking round on that always focuses on a real world problem. We've had things on healthcare and other topics that kids are seeing in the news so they understand how to think about them.